They told you that success is something you chase in the world. But what if I tell you that Neville Goddard shows it is something you awaken within? And in this video, you will see exactly how that shift unlocks your personal path to opulence, as each layer of the story reveals deeper methods and clearer insights designed to change your financial life from the inside out. I will reveal how imagination becomes the engine of prosperity, how assumption becomes the architect of your future, and how identity becomes the magnet that draws wealth into your lived reality, giving you the full value of understanding this teaching before the cinematic journey begins. This is where it begins, as the question of how wealth truly forms opens a door to the inner world that shapes the outer one. This is how it unfolds as you learn that every financial breakthrough first appears as a mental picture you repeatedly accept as fact. This is where truth breaks through, as you realize that abundance does not come from effort alone, but from the emotional climate you maintain in silence. This is why it matters, as every assumption you hold becomes a blueprint the universe quietly follows. This is where illusion fades, you see that lack was never an external condition, but a repeated internal agreement. This is the turning point as you start recognizing the connection between your inner conversations and your outer bank balance. This is where confidence rises, as the idea of living in the end stops sounding mystical and starts feeling practical. This is where the path widens as you notice how imagining from wealth rather than for wealth instantly shifts your emotional chemistry. This is where the inner temple forms, as Neville's teachings reveal that your mind is the workshop where opulence is engineered. This is where the atmosphere changes as you learn why sustained feeling is more powerful than scattered wishing. This is where clarity emerges, as the invisible mechanics of manifestations start making logical sense instead of sounding abstract. This is where alignment deepens as you begin to understand the difference between wanting money and being the version of yourself who has it. This is where resistance dissolves as you let go of old financial narratives that were never part of your true identity. This is where opportunity breathes, as the bridge of incidents becomes a natural unfolding instead of a mysterious idea. This is where your power crystallizes as you witness how wealth is a state, not an event. This is where the shift settles as inner certainty begins replacing external doubt. This is where intention sharpens as you learn to use imagination deliberately rather than accidentally. This is where the new story roots itself as you embody the wealthy version of yourself with increasing ease. This is where the first chapter closes and the next begins, because the path to opulence is only opening, and each section will take you deeper into Neville's methods, insights, and revelations, so that by the end of this journey, your understanding of wealth will be permanently transformed. Can you imagine standing at the threshold of a new financial identity and realizing that everything you once believed about wealth was only a fragment of the truth, waiting to be replaced by something far more powerful and far more personal? This is where the second chapter begins, as the unseen structure of manifestation steps into the light. This is how the deeper layers unfold, as you discover that wealth forms through repeated acceptance, not occasional wishing. This is where meaning intensifies, as you recognize that every mental scene is a seed destined to bloom in your reality. This is the moment momentum builds, as the law of assumption starts showing its elegant simplicity rather than mystery. This is where the veil lifts, as you learn that the subconscious mind does not argue. It obeys the emotional atmosphere you saturate it with. This is where the inner shift magnifies as you realize that financial evidence is never the cause but always the echo. This is why this matters, as understanding this principle frees you from chasing money and positions you to draw it effortlessly. This is where strength gathers as you start seeing your imagination as the factory that produces the life you live. This is where the threads connect as desire transforms into identity through repetition of feeling. This is the moment depth increases as the state becomes not a concept but a lived internal environment. This is where resistance loosens its grip, as you stop demanding signs from the world and start generating certainty within. This is where the story sharpens as Neville's methods become tools rather than theories, giving you agency you never realized you had. This is where confidence becomes gravity, as you begin to embody the truth that wealth is a byproduct of who you decide to be in consciousness. This is where old fears lose volume, as you witness how assumptions automatically script your experiences. This is where the internal horizon expands, as you learn that abundance responds to emotional consistency, not force. This is where the bridge of incidents prepares itself as your new state starts rearranging the outer world on your behalf. This is where realization dawns as you understand that imagining from the result activates the future version of you immediately. This is where the energetic shift stabilizes as you feel the difference between longing for change and stepping into change. This is where the next door opens as you embrace the knowledge that consciousness creates wealth with mathematical precision. This is where the second chapter concludes as the journey deepens, guiding you to uncover even greater dimensions of opulence in the next revelation. Because the path ahead holds insights that will reshape everything you believe about money, identity, and the power you carry within. Picture for a moment the realization that every prosperous person, knowingly or unknowingly, is living from a state that matches their results with remarkable precision. This is where the next layer rises as you begin to see wealth not as an event, but as an emotional climate cultivated within you. This is how the truth sharpens as you understand that your state is the silent signal the world responds to. This is where the thread deepens as you recognize that financial breakthroughs are reflections of stabilized inner assumptions. This is where the air changes as you learn that states, once embodied, behave like gravitational fields pulling matching experiences into your orbit. This is where clarity strengthens as you discover that trying hard while residing in a state of lack only magnifies frustration. This is the moment alignment becomes power as you embrace the fact that wealth follows identity, never effort alone. This is where resistance loses its teeth as you stop wrestling with circumstances and start sculpting your internal atmosphere. This is where the insight sharpens as you see why Neville insisted that feeling is the creative act. The point where ideas become reality. This is where the shift becomes tangible as you begin practicing the emotional tone of financial ease even before results appear. This is where the architecture grows clearer as you recognize that consistent inner feeling rewires subconscious expectation. This is where the journey deepens as you learn that identity and state are inseparable partners in manifestation. This is where momentum gathers as you realize that a wealthy state isn't a performance but a quiet inner knowing. This is where the lesson intensifies as you see how your reactions reveal the state you truly occupy. This is where the path illuminates as you discover that you can enter a new state through imagination with no permission from the world required. This is where the inner threshold opens as you recognize that wealth becomes inevitable when you refuse to leave the state that matches it. This is where the old story dissolves as you stop negotiating with doubt and start embodying certainty. This is where the energetic core stabilizes as the wealthy version of you becomes familiar instead of distant. This is where the next promise forms as you understand that sustaining the state transforms time into an ollie, not an obstacle. This is where the third chapter closes as the momentum of your journey accelerates, preparing you to step into the next revelation where Neville's deeper mechanics will show you how inner conversations quietly construct the financial future you are stepping toward. Now consider this inner voice that speaks without sound and yet holds the authority to write your entire financial destiny. This is where the next dimension reveals itself as you begin to understand that inner speech is the script your life obediently follows. This is how the landscape shifts as you recognize that every self-directed whisper reinforces a state that either allows or blocks abundance. This is where the power intensifies as you learn that your inner conversations are not commentary but commands given to the subconscious. This is where the hidden mechanism activates as you discover how rehearsing lack mentally guarantees its physical reflection. This is where awareness awakens as you realize how often you accept limiting stories without ever questioning who authored them. This is the moment clarity sharpens as you see why Neville insisted that inner talk is the truest form of prayer. This is where the connection strengthens as you understand that wealth-aligned dialogue generates wealth-aligned opportunities. This is where illusion thins as you notice that arguing with circumstances only amplifies the story you don't want. This is where empowerment rises as you learn to replace mental complaints with inner declarations of certainty. This is where the technique becomes alive as you begin crafting internal conversations with the tone of the financially fulfilled version of yourself. This is where the shift accelerates as repeating the elevated dialogue stabilizes you in a new identity that feels credible and natural. This is where the subconscious opens as it absorbs your new assumptions with loyalty and precision. This is where the transformation gains weight as you recognize that inner conversations build momentum long before outer results appear. This is where the inner atmosphere becomes magnetic as the tone of your self-talk starts aligning with abundance instead of anxiety. This is where resistance weakens as the habit of contradicting your desires fades into silence. This is where the new pattern crystallizes as you instinctively speak to yourself from wealth rather than toward it. This is where the emotional tone harmonizes as certainty, becomes easier to hold than doubt. This is where the lesson deepens as you realize that your inner is the architect shaping the opportunities that will soon unfold. This is where the fourth chapter ends as you step closer to mastery, preparing to enter the next revelation where Neville's teachings uncover how imagination, when directed with discipline, begins constructing the events that lead you straight into a life of opulence. Suppose you discover that imagination is not merely fantasy, but the workshop where your future wealth is first constructed in vivid detail. This is where the next layer of mastery begins as imaginal scenes reveal their power to write your financial direction with clarity and intention. This is how the truth expands as you understand that a scene performed internally with conviction becomes a cause that will express itself outwardly in time. This is where the picture sharpens as you see how Neville instructed students to craft short but emotionally saturated scenes that imply the wish fulfilled. This is where theme mechanics activate as you learn that the subconscious responds to implication rather than effort. This is where vision deepens as you discover that repetition of an imaginal act plants it firmly into the soil of assumption. This is the moment transformation quickens as the inner world becomes more convincing than the external one. This is where inner authority strengthens as you realize you don't need to visualize perfectly but only believe the scene carries meaning. This is where embody, tone becomes the true ingredient as the feeling of the scene imprints itself more strongly than the imagery itself. This is where clarity rises as you notice how your state begins to shift after only a few sincere sessions of imaginal work. This is where momentum builds as the imagined end begins to feel more familiar than your present circumstances. This is where the deeper layer reveals itself as you acknowledge that the mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined event and a physical one. This is where alignment locks in as your reactions beg, in matching the person who already lives the financial outcome you are imagining. This is where inner certainty grows as you feel the emotional reality of wealth before it becomes visible in the world. This is where resistance dissolves as the imaginal scene becomes a sanctuary where abundance feels natural rather than forced. This is where the seed of opulence roots itself as the scene begins to live within you with quiet persistence. This is where the subconscious accepts the new assumption as the dominant truth because you keep returning to it with faith rather than desperation. This is where your identity begins to organize itself around the imaginal experience instead of old financial memories. This is where the bridge of incidents prepares to unfold because the imaginal act has already declared its end. This is where the fifth chapter comes to a close as the narrative deepens, guiding you toward the next revelation, where the emotional atmosphere behind your imaginal acts becomes the deciding factor that determines how quickly wealth flows into your lived reality. Envision a world where you realize that your emotional climate is the true currency through which wealth is either invited or repelled. This is where the next dimension opens as you learn that feelings are the soil in which assumptions germinate and grow. This is how the deeper mechanics reveal themselves as you understand that feeling rich precedes becoming rich in the physical world. This is where the rhythm of transformation rises as the atmosphere within you begins shaping the opportunities around you. This is where the subtle truth surfaces as you recognize that motion is not a reaction but a generator of external events. This is the moment lens widens as you realize why Neville emphasized the phrase, "feeling is the secret," with such unwavering certainty. This is where internal gravity forms as consistent emotional tones pull matching circumstances closer with quiet precision. This is where the pulse of your new identity steadies as you stop fluctuating between faith and doubt. This is where resistance weakens as familiar emotional patterns of lack begin dissolving under the weight of newly chosen feelings. This is where alignment deepens as the wealthy version of you becomes emotionally believable, not hypothetical. This is where clarity expands as you see that maintaining an emotional atmosphere of abundance is more powerful than hours of forced visualization. This is where the inner landscape softens as you allow ease, calm, and confidence to replace urgency and fear. This is where the shift grows tangible as emotional congruence becomes your natural default instead of an occasional effort. This is where the state stabilizes as you respond to life from the emotional tone of someone who already has what they desire. This is where realization thickens as you understand that emotion is the bridge between imagination and physical manifestation. This is where the inner current strengthens as your feelings begin aligning with the financial future you're constructing. This is where your identity anchors as the emotional atmosphere you embody becomes more real than temporary circumstances. This is where the subconscious pledges allegiance to your chosen state because your feelings prove you mean it. This is where the path of opulence becomes inevitable. As emotional steadiness transforms desire into certainty. This is where the 6th chapter completes itself, as the story prepares to lead you deeper, guiding you toward the next revelation, where you'll discover how the bridge of incidents carries you effortlessly toward your financial destiny through a sequence of events shaped entirely by your newly chosen state. Think of the moment when you understand that the bridge of incidents is not a mysterious force, but a natural consequence of occupying the state of your fulfilled desire. This is where the next revelation rises as you begin to see how life reorganizes itself to reflect the identity you have assumed. This is how these sequence unfolds as the world reshapes in ways that often appear ordinary, yet carry extraordinary precision. This is where insight sharpens as you realize that every encounter, shift, and opportunity begins aligning with your new internal reality. This is where the magic becomes method, as you understand that the bridge is built by your assumptions, not by luck or chance. This is the moment awareness deepens, as you see why Neville taught that you do not need to know how your desire will unfold, only that it must. This is where certainty strengthens as you stop searching for signs and start trusting the natural unfolding of events. This is where tension dissolves as the pressure to control outcomes fades under the reliability of the law. This is where alignment settles as you learn to walk through each incident with calm expectation instead of frantic hope. This is where the terrain shifts as you discover that even challenges on the bridge are stepping stones, not setbacks. This is where clarity expands as you realize the bridge forms moment by moment, shaped by your reactions and maintained by your state. This is where the deeper understanding emerges as you accept that the bridge is always the most direct path, even when it feels unusual. This is where your inner posture matures as you learn to respond to each event as the person who already possesses their financial fulfillment. This is where momentum increases as small shifts accumulate into substantial changes in your external world. This is where intuition becomes louder as you feel guided by a quiet certainty that everything is unfolding with intention. This is where synchronicity becomes familiar, as opportunities begin appearing with a timing that feels almost orchestrated. This is where your new identity gains strength as you witness the world reflecting your internal transformation. This is where old doubt loses its influence as the bridge proves itself through consistent and undeniable progress. This is where trust becomes a natural companion as you move forward with a steady sense of inevitability. This is where the 7th chapter concludes as the path ahead prepares to reveal the next dimension of opulence, guiding you into the powerful realization that self-concept, not effort, not technique, but identity itself, is the true engine that drives wealth into your lived reality. Ask yourself what happens when you stop trying to manifest money and instead become the version of yourself for whom wealth is normal and expected. This is where the next layer of mastery rises as you realize that self-concept is the foundation upon which every financial transformation stands. This is how the truth deepens as you understand that you can never consistently exceed the identity you hold about yourself. This is where the inner spotlight shifts as you recognize that wealth responds not to desire but to self-definition. This is where the revelations harpens as you learn that identity is the silent contract you make with life about what you believe you deserve. This is the moment your understanding evolves as you begin noticing how every assumption about your value shapes financial opportunities. This is where the emotional terrain rearranges as you drop old labels like struggling, unlucky, or trying, and step into capable, worthy, and prosperous. This is where the hidden architecture of wealth becomes clearer as you understand that identity precedes evidence, never the other way around. This is where momentum builds as your self-concept shifts from effort to embodiment. This is where the old inner narrative loosens its grip as you stop identifying with past financial experiences that no longer match who you're becoming. This is where the new story forms as you begin to speak to yourself from the clarity of someone who trusts their own power. This is where transformation accelerates as every inner conversation begins supporting your chosen identity instead of contradicting it. This is where emotional stability rises as you respond to life as the wealthy version of yourself, even before results appear. This is where the internal atmosphere matures as certainty becomes a daily habit rather than a rare moment. This is where alignment becomes unshakable, as you start attracting opportunities that match your evolved sense of self. This is where resistance dissolves, as you realize that identity is the command center of all manifestation. This is where your inner blueprint stabilizes, as you hold the emotional posture of someone who expects wealth without strain. This is where clarity sharpens, as you see how every part of your life begins reflecting your renewed self-definition. This is where identity becomes destiny, as you embody the truth that who you are being determines what you receive. This is where the 8th chapter concludes, as the next revelation prepares to unfold, guiding you deeper into the power of persistence. The quiet, disciplined consistency Neville taught as the force that transforms fleeting insights into lasting, undeniable opulence. Consider the possibility that persistence is the muscle behind every manifestation, the silent power that keeps the inner state alive long enough for the outer world to reflect it. This is where the next layer of mastery unfolds, as you understand that persistence is not struggle but continued assumption in the face of delay. This is how the truth sharpens, as you see why Neville emphasized holding the endeavor when nothing in the world agrees with you yet. This is where the emotional maturity begins, as you learn to stay loyal to the inner reality rather than the temporary evidence outside. This is where transformation deepens, as you recognize that each moment of faith builds momentum within the subconscious. This is the moment your understanding evolves, as you realize that persistence is proof to your mind that you refuse to abandon your chosen identity. This is where internal strength forms, as you practice consistency not with force, but with relaxed certainty. This is where clarity surfaces, as you understand the difference between wishing and persisting. One fades, the other establishes truth. This is where the inner climate stabilizes, as your chosen financial state becomes familiar and comfortable, rather than distant or imagined. This is where doubt begins to dissolve, as the repetition of belief becomes more natural than fear. This is where your new identity strengthens, as persistence reinforces the emotional tone of abundance day after day. This is where the energetic signature of wealth embeds itself in your subconscious through gentle, continuous acceptance. This is where resilience rises, as you understand that persistence is not about fighting circumstances but refusing to collapse into them. This is where the bridge of incidents gains structure, as your unwavering state compels the world to reorganize itself around your assumption. This is where alignment becomes tangible, as routine inner loyalty starts producing outer shifts with increasing clarity. This is where the narrative of lack loses its authority, as persistence erases old psychological patterns that once held you back. This is where confidence matures, as you begin trusting the law, rather than reacting to temporary appearances. This is where the path to opulence becomes unmistakable, as the state of wealth becomes your emotional home. This is where realization blooms, as you see that persistence transforms desire into inevitability through quiet, steady repetition. This is where the 9th chapter completes itself, as the journey prepares to move into the next revelation, where Neville's teachings uncover how detachment, the art of allowing rather than forcing, becomes the companion to persistence that opens the final doorway to visible, undeniable abundance. Envision a world where letting go becomes the secret lever that allows your inner assumptions to translate into outer reality. This is where the next dimension opens, as you understand that attachment often blocks what you most want, creating tension that the subconscious cannot reconcile. This is how insight deepens, as you see that detachment is not abandonment, but quiet confidence in the inevitable manifestation of your chosen state. This is where the emotional landscape shifts, as you recognize that forcing or grasping for results creates friction with the natural flow of life. This is where clarity sharpens, as you learn that detachment works hand in hand with persistence, forming a balanced rhythm between active assumption and relaxed expectation. This is where the internal horizon widens, as you begin to feel the freedom of releasing timelines, deadlines, and obsessive monitoring of outcomes. This is the moment transformation accelerates, as you realize that allowing does not mean passivity, but trust in the invisible orchestration of events. This is where alignment stabilizes, as you notice how opportunities and resources begin arriving unbidden but perfectly timed. This is where the emotional atmosphere lightens, as anxiety dissolves and confidence in your inner reality takes over. This is where the shift becomes palpable, as you feel the subtle, magnetic pull of your assumed state guiding each action effortlessly. This is where the inner temple strengthens, as you stop negotiating with circumstances and start embodying certainty without resistance. This is where insight ripens as you understand that detachment amplifies the creative power of imagination by removing internal conflict and doubt. This is where resilience consolidates as patience becomes a tool rather than a test of faith. This is where the bridge of incidents flows more smoothly as you allow events to unfold without interference from fear or impatience. This is where the energetic tone stabilizes as relaxed expectancy becomes your default state, commanding life to respond accordingly. This is where the story deepens as you see that detachment is the ultimate form of trusting your own creative authority. This is where confidence matures as you release the outcome and embrace the process. This is where tension fades as you align fully with the version of yourself that already lives in wealth. This is where the inner current strengthens as detachment creates a vacuum for abundance to enter naturally. This is where the 10th chapter concludes as the journey prepares to reveal the next revelation, where Neville's teachings will uncover how gratitude acts as a multiplier, amplifying the results of persistence, assumption, and detachment into tangible, flowing wealth. Now consider this as you realize that gratitude is not just polite acknowledgement, but a potent force that aligns your inner frequency with abundance. This is where the next layer emerges, as you see that feeling thankful for what is, even before the external manifestation, activates the law of assumption in a more powerful way. This is how the truth deepens, as you learn that appreciation creates a vibration that magnetizes wealth, rather than chasing it. This is where clarity sharpens, as you notice that gratitude transforms desire into acknowledgement, reducing resistance and enhancing receptivity. This is where momentum builds as you begin incorporating daily expressions of genuine thankfulness into your internal state. This is where emotional alignment intensifies, as each act of gratitude solidifies the identity of someone who already possesses abundance. This is where the inner shift becomes visible as subtle external confirmations begin appearing, reinforcing your belief in the process. This is where the bridge of incidents gains strength as opportunities align more naturally with your energized state. This is where perception expands as you understand that gratitude magnifies every other practice, from persistence to detachment, by harmonizing your internal environment. This is where the heart opens as you realize that feeling appreciation is itself the signal to life that you are ready for more. This is where resistance fades as gratitude naturally dissolves doubt and scarcity-based thinking. This is where the inner current strengthens as your frequency resonates with prosperity more fully and consistently. This is where clarity deepens as you notice how gratitude shifts ordinary circumstances into meaningful signs of abundance. This is where emotional stability rises, as the act of acknowledging what is already present creates inner security and faith. This is where insight sharpens as Neville's principle shows that gratitude is both the cause and confirmation of manifestation. This is where trust consolidates as you stop forcing results and begin co-creating with life in a state of thankfulness. This is where opportunity flows as your subconscious organizes events to reflect the identity and frequency of someone perpetually grateful. This is where confidence matures as appreciation becomes effortless, rather than forced. This is where the atmosphere of abundance thickens as your inner gratitude projects outward, attracting alignment. This is where the 11th chapter concludes, as the path deepens, preparing you to explore the next revelation where imagination and assumption combine in the precise orchestration that Neville calls the true art of creation. Picture for a moment how imagination is not mere daydreaming, but a deliberate, exact tool that sculpts your future reality. This is where the next layer emerges as you understand that each imagined scene acts as a blueprint your subconscious follows faithfully. This is how insight deepens as you recognize that imagine must be directed with emotional conviction rather than casual thought. This is where momentum builds as repeated, vivid, and emotionally charged imaginal acts begin reshaping your inner identity. This is where clarity sharpens as you see that detail matters, because the mind responds to what feels real, not vague or abstract. This is where precision rises as you learn to enter the state akin to sleep and impress the subconscious with every nuance of the desired reality. This is where the inner landscape transforms as each scene becomes a rehearsal of life as you wish it to be lived. This is where the bridge of incidents becomes more tangible as precise imagination generates subtle opportunities that align perfectly with your chosen outcome. This is where confidence strengthens as your mental rehearsals create a sense of inevitability, rather than hope. This is where resistance loosens its grip as your imagination provides proof to your subconscious that the outcome is real and already existing. This is where emotional depth rises as the scenes you create are felt fully, saturating your being with the reality of wealth. This is where alignment consolidates as inner conviction becomes your magnetic force, effortlessly attracting matching circumstances. This is where insight sharpens as you notice that imagination is always followed by outer reflection if consistently impressed with feeling. This is where identity strengthens as you begin naturally thinking, speaking, and acting from the version of yourself who already possesses the desired wealth. This is where subtlety becomes your ally as even brief, emotionally charged scenes leave a lasting impression on your inner mind. This is where the energetic signature of your desired life intensifies, as repeated imaginal acts anchor the state deeply within. This is where trust builds as life begins to respond predictably to your inner rehearsals. This is where clarity expands as imagination becomes not just a practice, but a lifestyle, guiding each moment toward opulence. This is where momentum solidifies as every detail aligns into a coherent inner story. This is where the 12th chapter concludes, preparing you for the next revelation where you'll learn how assumption, the silent acceptance of your wealth identity, becomes the unstoppable engine that drives manifestation forward with precision and grace. Suppose you discover that assumption is not wishful thinking, but a deliberate stance of inner reality, the quiet command your subconscious obeys without question. This is where the next layer unfolds, as you recognize that assuming your financial identity is the pivot on which all manifestation turns. This is how insight deepens as you see that external circumstances cannot contradict what you truly accept within. This is where clarity sharpens as Neville's teaching reveals that living as if is not pretending but embodying the truth of your chosen state. This is where emotional alignment grows as the feeling of already having wealth saturates your being, overriding previous doubts and fears. This is where internal momentum builds as assumption transforms imagination into a lived experience that radiates outward. This is where subtlety becomes power as you realize that small, consistent assumptions ripple into substantial outer effects. This is where resistance begins to dissolve as your mind recognizes the reality you accept more than the evidence it sees. This is where alignment strengthens as each assumption naturally draws events, people, and opportunities that mirror your internal conviction. This is where trust solidifies as you observe life rearranging itself to confirm the identity you now inhabit. This is where emotional resonance deepens as assumption becomes effortless, blending seamlessly into your daily thoughts and feelings. This is where the bridge of incidents gains precision as assumed states guide circumstances into harmonious flow. This is where your inner authority rises as you stop negotiating with external limitations and begin commanding reality through inner acceptance. This is where clarity crystallizes as you understand that assumption is the blueprint, imagination is the drawing, and feeling is the mortar that cements it all. This is where persistence becomes magnified as continuous assumption outlasts fleeting doubt and hesitation. This is where confidence grows as every subtle external confirmation reinforces your unwavering inner stance. This is where the atmosphere of wealth thickens as assumption saturates your subconscious with inevitability. This is where the inner structure of identity solidifies as you consistently inhabit the version of yourself who already possesses abundance. This is where your creative power amplifies as assumptions, synchronizes mind, emotion, and belief into unstoppable magnetism. This is where the 13th chapter closes, leading to the next revelation, where you will learn how imagination, assumption, and feeling combine in perfect orchestration to generate the visible, undeniable reality of financial opulence. Envision a world where alignment is no longer abstract, but a living, breathing practice that transforms every mental and emotional choice into a magnet for abundance. This is where the next dimension opens as you begin to see that when thought, feeling, and desire converge, the universe responds with remarkable efficiency. This is how insight deepens as you understand that misalignment between your emotions and imagination is the silent saboteur of manifestation. This is where clarity strengthens as Neville's teachings reveal that desire alone is not enough. It must be fully integrated with feeling and identity. This is where momentum builds as you practice holding the mental image of wealth while saturating it with the corresponding emotional reality. This is where internal resonance expands as alignment turns imagination into lived certainty rather than mere fantasy. This is where persistence finds focus as repeated congruent states strain your subconscious to operate like a finely tuned instrument. This is where resistance is softened as your mind and emotions stop contradicting each other and begin moving in concert toward fulfillment. This is where subtlety becomes the key as small, precise adjustments in thought or feeling ripple outward into tangible results. This is where the bridge of incidents flows more naturally, as aligned energy creates circumstances that feel effortless, yet inevitable. This is where identity consolidates, as the synchronized state reinforces the version of yourself who already lives in abundance. This is where emotional depth anchors, as feelings of wealth saturate the body, mind, and spirit. This is where insight sharpens as you recognize that alignment is the invisible glue connecting imagination to manifestation. This is where trust strengthens as the repeated experience of inner congruence produces consistent outer reflection. This is where the inner climate stabilizes as every action, reaction, and expectation aligns with your desired reality. This is where confidence radiates as the union of thought and feeling leaves no room for doubt. This is where opportunity accelerates as aligned energy attracts circumstances, people, and timing that perfectly match your assumed state. This is where the energetic signature of wealth becomes consistent, palpable, and self-reinforcing. This is where clarity matures as you realize alignment is not a technique, but a lifestyle. This is where the 14th chapter concludes, preparing you to step into the next revelation, where Neville's teachings uncover the transformative power of inner dialogue in silently scripting the financial life you are destined to live. Think of the moment when you notice that every fleeting thought and whispered phrase inside your mind carries the power to attract or repel abundance. This is where the next layer emerges as you begin to examine how your inner words define your identity and set the energetic blueprint for your experiences. This is how insight deepens as you realize that complaints, doubts, and repeated "I can't" statements silently enforce scarcity in your life. This is where clarity sharpens as you understand that inner dialogue is not merely reflection but active creation. This is where momentum grows as you learn to replace mental chatter with statements aligned with your chosen financial identity. This is where emotional resonance intensifies as repeated affirmations, imagined in feeling, they begin shaping your subconscious reality. This is where alignment strengthens as your inner conversation matches the state of the wealthy, fulfilled version of yourself. This is where subtlety becomes powerful, as even offhand thoughts gradually adjust the pathways of manifestation. This is where resistance dissolves as conscious monitoring of dialogue trains the mind to favor abundance naturally. This is where the bridge of incidents becomes smoother as opportunities begin reflecting the internal script with increasing clarity. This is where persistence gains leverage as repeated inner statements reinforce identity, not just desire. This is where internal authority solidifies as you stop arguing with circumstances and begin directing your own reality silently but decisively. This is where insight sharpens as you see that imagination alone is less effective without congruent inner dialogue. This is where emotional consistency deepens as every thought, word, and feeling harmonizes toward wealth. This is where trust magnifies as you witness life reflecting the tone of your inner communication. This is where identity anchors as you consistently speak and think from the perspective of the abundant version of yourself. This is where clarity intensifies as the power of internal scripting becomes undeniable in shaping external results. This is where energy amplifies as your subconscious records your inner words as law. This is where opportunity responds naturally to the frequency of your dialogue. This is where the 15th chapter concludes, leading into the next revelation, where you will uncover how imagination, emotion, and action fuse into seamless creation, forming the ultimate expression of Neville Goddard's path to opulence. Now consider this fusion as you realize that imagination sets the blueprint, emotion powers the engine, and inspired action lays the track along which abundance travels. This is where the next dimension opens as you begin to see that acting from the state of already having wealth aligns the outer world with your inner reality. This is how insight deepens, as you understand that emotion without imagination lacks direction, and imagination without action remains dormant. This is where clarity sharpens, as Neville's method reveals the necessity of integrating feeling into every mental rehearsal and then translating that state into deliberate steps in your daily life. This is where momentum builds, as each action taken from a place of inner certainty accelerates the manifestation process. This is where the internal atmosphere strengthens as emotion aligns with imagination, creating a magnetic field that draws circumstances into harmony with your desired reality. This is where subtlety becomes power, as inspired action emerges naturally, requiring no force or struggle. This is where resistance fades, as the habitual tension between wanting and receiving dissolves under congruent inner and outer alignment. This is where the bridge of incidents flows smoothly, as events begin synchronizing with the state you inhabit, making each opportunity a reflection of your inner world. This is where persistence gains depth, as consistent fusion of imagination, feeling, and action reinforces the identity of the wealthy, fulfilled self. This is where confidence rises, as you notice that life itself responds predictably to your integrated state. This is where clarity expands, as you understand that inspired action is never random, but the natural expression of your internal convictions. This is where trust matures, as each completed action, no matter how small, confirms your ability to co-create with life. This is where energy intensifies, as imagination, feeling, and action form an unbroken loop, continuously amplifying results. This is where internal authority solidifies, as you stop doubting the effectiveness of your efforts and trust the process fully. This is where alignment becomes tangible, as your outer life mirrors your inner state with increasing precision. This is where momentum sustains itself, as the fusion generates a self-reinforcing cycle of creation. This is where opportunity flows effortlessly, as the world responds to the integrated signal of your being. This is where mastery begins to emerge, as the fusion becomes instinctive, guiding your steps without conscious strain. This is where the 16th chapter concludes, preparing you to enter the next revelation, where Neville's teachings will reveal how the assumption of inevitable wealth transforms hesitation into effortless manifestation. Ask yourself what happens when you internalize the truth that wealth is not optional, but a certainty awaiting your full acceptance. This is where the next revelation emerges, as you see that assumption is more than belief, it is the lived conviction of inevitability. This is how clarity deepens, as you realize that when the future is assumed, the present becomes the rehearsal stage for what must manifest. This is where momentum builds, as every thought, feeling, and act begins operating under the principle that your desired wealth is already yours. This is where internal authority strengthens, as you stop negotiating with circumstances and instead dictate reality through unwavering assumption. This is where emotional resonance intensifies, as the feeling of inevitability saturates your inner world, silencing fear and hesitation. This is where subtlety becomes power, as even small actions performed from this state carry the weight of certainty. This is where resistance dissolves, as doubt loses its grip against the steady current of assumed reality. This is where alignment sharpens, as opportunities, people, and resources begin appearing in perfect correspondence with your internal conviction. This is where the bridge of incidents flow effortlessly, as events naturally conform to the state of inevitable wealth. This is where identity consolidates, as you embody the version of yourself who experiences abundance as normal and expected. This is where trust deepens, as external confirmation becomes the natural reflection of inner certainty. This is where energy stabilizes, as the frequency of inevitability harmonizes every aspect of your life. This is where persistence becomes effortless, because the future you assume no longer requires force to manifest. This is where clarity expands, as you recognize that life responds instantly to the authority of your inner state. This is where emotional tone thickens, as excitement, calm, and confidence coexist, signaling total alignment with your desired reality. This is where insight ripens, as you understand that assumption is the final act of mastery over doubt and external uncertainty. This is where opportunity accelerates, as the world aligns with the unwavering signal you emit from within. This is where the 17th chapter concludes, preparing you for the next revelation, where Neville's teachings reveal the exponential power of vivid mental rehearsal in magnifying wealth beyond ordinary imagination. Picture for a moment how vividly rehearsing your desires mentally transforms them from abstract wishes into palpable inner realities. This is where the next layer emerges, as you begin to see that repeated, sensory-rich imagination impresses the subconscious far more effectively than passive thought or fleeting visualization. This is how insight deepens as you notice that imagination becomes a laboratory where future wealth is first tested, felt, and refined. This is where momentum builds. As the more real the scene feels emotionally and sensorially, the faster outer circumstances conform to it. This is where clarity sharpens as you recognize that imagination without feeling lacks the power to compel manifestation. This is where emotional resonance intensifies, as mental rehearsal produces a sense of certainty, satisfaction, and anticipation. This is where subtlety becomes a tool. 7 minor details in imagination influence the subconscious programming of reality. This is where resistance fades as immersive practices silences doubt and cultivates unwavering inner conviction. This is where the bridge of incidents gains momentum as real-world opportunities begin reflecting the rehearsed scenes naturally and effortlessly. This is where identity consolidates as the person living their rehearsed life becomes more familiar than the person still clinging to old patterns. This is where trust solidifies as repeated rehearsal generates undeniable alignment between inner and outer worlds. This is where persistence becomes effortless because the subconscious is continuously reinforced through vivid experience. This is where clarity expands as imagination, feeling, and expectation fuse into a single, coherent signal that the world cannot resist responding to. This is where energy amplifies as the act of rehearsal creates a magnetic pull for wealth, synchronizing circumstances and timing perfectly. This is where confidence matures as the inner experience of abundance becomes more convincing than any external proof. This is where opportunity flows more freely, as life mirrors the clarity, emotion, and detail of your mental practice. This is where insight ripens as you understand that repetition and vividness are the compounding interest of manifestation. This is where alignment deepens as imagination turns into inner reality, which then naturally extends outward. This is where the 18th chapter concludes, guiding you to the next revelation where Neville's teachings reveal the art of living from the end, a method for fully embodying wealth so that it manifests as an effortless, lived reality. Envision a world where the end of your desire exists as fully real in your mind before it ever appears in the external world. This is where the next layer emerges, as you begin to understand that living from the end is not wishful thinking, but the conscious decision to embody the reality you intend to manifest. This is how insight deepens, as you see that every thought, feeling, and action begins aligning with the person who already possesses the wealth you desire. This is where clarity sharpens, as Neville's teaching reveals that the mind and subconscious cannot distinguish between actual experience and vividly assumed reality. This is where momentum builds, as habitual assumption of the end state rewrites identity, replacing limitation with the natural confidence of abundance. This is where emotional resonance intensifies as the feeling of having arrived saturates your being, overpowering doubt, fear, and scarcity thinking. This is where subtlety becomes power as consistent embodiment of the end aligns your external world with the inner reality effortlessly. This is where resistance dissolves as living from the end silences inner debate and produces inner certainty that radiates outward. This is where the bridge of incidents accelerates as circumstances and opportunities naturally conform to your assumed state without forced effort. This is where identity consolidates as your inner experience becomes the dominant reality, guiding thoughts, choices, and interactions from the perspective of the fulfilled self. This is where trust solidifies as repeated experience of living from the end generates undeniable confirmation that your assumption is effective. This is where energy stabilizes as your emotional and mental states consistently reflect abundance, magnetizing wealth in harmony with your inner life. This is where persistence becomes effortless because embodiment eliminates struggle and replaces it with natural alignment. This is where clarity expands as living from the end transforms every mundane moment into a rehearsal for wealth. This is where opportunity flows as life mirrors the internal reality you have chosen to inhabit. This is where insight ripens as you understand that manifestation is the inevitable result of fully assuming the desired state. This is where alignment deepens as every aspect of your being vibrates in harmony with the fulfilled identity. This is where confidence matures, as the experience of already having creates a life anchored in certainty and abundance. This is where the 19th chapter concludes, preparing you for the final revelation, where Neville's teachings reveal the culmination of all principles into a continuous, unstoppable flow of opulence that defines the path to complete financial mastery. Can you imagine a life where abundance is not occasional, but constant, where financial opportunities appear as naturally as breathing, and every action and thought aligns with the effortless manifestation of wealth? This is where the ultimate revelation emerges, as you understand that opulence is not a goal, but a state, maintained by consistent inner practice and unwavering belief. This is how insight deepens as you see that the continuous flow of wealth is the product of harmonizing imagination, assumption, and emotion into one coherent, unstoppable current. This is where clarity sharpens as Neville's teachings reveal that persistent inner alignment creates an energy that attracts circumstances, people, and resources in perfect timing. This is where momentum solidifies as each day becomes a natural rehearsal for abundance, reinforcing identity and expectation. This is where emotional resonance intensifies as joy, gratitude, and certainty fuel the ongoing manifestation of prosperity. This is where subtlety becomes power, as even small habitual practices of inner alignment compound into extraordinary outer results. This is where resistance dissolves, as you recognize that living in the flow of opulence eliminates doubt, fear, and scarcity automatically. This is where the bridge of incidents becomes seamless, as life mirrors your inner state with remarkable consistency. This is where identity consolidates as the continuous experience of abundance embeds itself into every thought, feeling, and action. This is where trust matures, as repeated confirmation of manifested desires builds an unshakable belief in your creative power. This is where energy amplifies as alignment, imagination, and assumption combine to form a perpetual current that draws wealth naturally and effortlessly. This is where clarity expands as you realize that opulence is not about accumulation, but about being, and being abundant produces tangible abundance without struggle. This is where opportunity flows endlessly, as life responds to the state of someone who inhabits wealth permanently. This is where insight ripens as you understand that the continuous flow of opulence is the inevitable result of Neville's principles fully applied and integrated into your life. This is where alignment deepens as your inner state dictates the consistent manifestation of your desires. This is where confidence radiates as the certainty of abundance becomes intrinsic to your identity. This is where mastery is revealed as the practice of imagination, feeling, assumption, persistence, and embodiment creates a self-sustaining cycle of prosperity. This is where life becomes effortless, as wealth is no longer pursued, but lived naturally and continuously. This is where the 20th chapter concludes, completing the cinematic journey through Neville Goddard's path to opulence, leaving you empowered, aligned, and fully equipped to embody, attract, and maintain the life of abundance you were always destined to live.